The body hit her doorstep at 11 minutes past midnight. Noemi Graves had been awake anyway, bent over her work table with a mortar and pestle, grinding dried valerian root into powder. Her clinic's back office, smelling of herbs and antiseptic, and the faint copper tang that never quite left her hands no matter how many times she scrubbed them. She was a healer. She had been a healer since she was 19 years old. When her grandmother pressed the old knowledge into her palms like a gift, and she was 31 now, with a small, private clinic tucked into the basement level of a converted brownstone in the part of the city where humans and vampires had been pretending to coexist peacefully for the last decade. The pretending part was critical. Nobody said it out loud. But everybody knew when the knock came it was not a knock at all. It was a collapse. A heavy, catastrophic impact against her reinforced steel door that sent the hanging herbs swaying from their ceiling hooks and knocked a glass vial from its shelf to shatter on the stone floor. Noemi was on her feet before the echo finished. She had treated everything from silver-poisoned vampires to humans with fang wounds. They refused to explain to the city council's cleanup crews, who showed up occasionally at 3 in the morning, needing stitches, and their records kept quiet. She had learned to move fast and ask questions later. She pulled the door open. The Vampire King of the Eastern bloodlines lay crumpled on her threshold. She knew who he was. Every person in this city, human or otherwise, knew who Constantin Rothbart was. He was not the sort of creature you forgot once seen. 6 feet and 3 inches of ancient power. White hair swept back from a face so precisely beautiful it seemed carved from cold marble. Skin the color of new snow, and eyes when open a shade of silver grey so pale they looked lit from inside. He had ruled the Eastern courts for 400 years. He wore bespoke suits that cost more than her clinic's monthly rent. He had once, according to a story she had heard whispered in the vampire districts, executed 3 of his own council members for breaking blood law in a single evening and gone back to his dinner without visibly disturbing a hair. He was currently bleeding from 4 separate wounds and barely conscious on her doorstep. One white-gloved hand still pressed uselessly against his side, and the look in his half-open eyes when they found her face was something she had never expected to see there. Relief. Healer, he said, and his voice even now was a low, commanding thing that moved through the air like a physical force. I was told you do not turn away the dying. Noemi Graves looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which she calculated every single impossible, catastrophic consequence of what she was about to do. If she helped him, she was touching vampire court politics. If she refused him, she was watching a person die on her floor, and that was a thing she categorically did not do. She made the impossible choice. "Get inside," she said, and grabbed him under the arms. He was heavier than he looked. Vampires always were. Something to do with bone density and whatever strange physics governed their kind. And Noemi was strong for a human woman, but this was like hauling carved stone. She got him as far as the examination table in the main room, dragged a rolling stool under her with 1 foot, and started assessing before she had even fully caught her breath. The wounds were not ordinary. That registered within the first 30 seconds. A vampire's body healed most conventional injuries within minutes, the famous blood magic of their kind knitting tissue back together with the speed that still struck her as slightly miraculous, even after years of working adjacent to their world. These wounds were not healing. She pressed a clean cloth to the deepest one along his left side and watched it saturate red-black in seconds, and the blood was wrong, too dark, carrying a chemical smell underneath the iron. "What did they use?" she demanded. His jaw tightened. "Valka root extract. Weaponized and injected via blade coating." She knew what that was. Valka root was a botanical compound used in small, carefully measured doses to suppress the regeneration response in vampires during surgical procedures. The equivalent of vampire anesthesia in some ways, though that was a crude comparison. In weaponized concentrations, it did not suppress healing, it inverted it. It turned the body's regenerative drive against itself, causing rapid internal breakdown. She had read about it in the old treatises, but never seen it used as a weapon because there were blood laws against it. Ancient ones. The kind with consequences attached that nobody who valued their continued existence would voluntarily invite. The fact that someone had used it on the Vampire King specifically told her a very great deal about how badly things had deteriorated in the Eastern Court tonight. "How long ago?" she asked, hands already moving, pulling drawers open. 40 minutes. His voice was controlled, remarkably so for a man who was dying, and she noted that with the distant professional part of her mind, because it told her something about him, that he had enough discipline to keep his voice steady when his entire body was failing. "The suppression compound will have finished bonding to your regenerative cells within another 20 minutes, she said, laying out what she needed with the practiced precision of someone who did not permit herself to panic. "After that, even if I neutralize the Valkyr root extract, your body will need something to jumpstart the healing response because it will essentially have forgotten how." The silver eyes tracked her across the room. "You know how to do this." It was not quite a question. It was more like a king confirming what he had already decided was true before he arrived. "I know how to do this," she agreed, and then she looked at him very directly, because she needed him to understand what she was about to say. "But the neutralizing compound requires a bonded blood catalyst, which means I need a small amount of your blood and a small amount of mine to create the binding agent. Under blood law, that constitutes a healing compact. It is not a feeding. It is not a bond in the romantic sense. It is a medical compact recognized by your own ancient codes, but it will mark us both. Anyone in your court who knows what to look for will be able to sense that you entered a healing compact with a human." The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. "You know blood law," he said, and this time there was something different in his voice. Something that sounded faintly like surprise, which was not a thing she imagined Constantin Rothbart experienced often. "I treat your kind for a living," she said flatly. "I made it my business to know the rules I was working under." He studied her with those pale, ancient eyes, and she felt the weight of 4 centuries behind that look, the accumulated judgment of a creature who had watched empires rise and fall and had learned to read the truth in people's faces with a precision that must have become very nearly perfect over that much time. "Do it," he said. "I need your verbal acknowledgement that you understand the compact you are entering," she said, because she was nothing if not precise about these things. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but its shadow. "Noemi Graves," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice did something strange to the air in the room, made it feel heavier and more charged. "You are asking a 400-year-old king to confirm informed consent while he bleeds on your examination table." "Yes," she said, "I am." Another pause. "I consent," he said, and then quietly, "I appreciate the protocol." She got to work. The compound took 11 minutes to prepare, and she did not speak during those 11 minutes, except to give him brief instructions. "Keep pressure on the wound. Tell her if the numbness spread above the collarbone. Stay conscious." He followed every instruction with the precise, unhesitating compliance of a man who knew better than to be difficult when his life was in someone else's hands, and that also told her something about him. That beneath the regal authority there lived a fundamental pragmatism. She made the small incision on the inside of her wrist with a lancet, clinical and quick, added the catalyst, added the neutralizing compound she had pulled from the climate-controlled vault at the back of the clinic, and combined the components with the sample of his blood she had carefully collected with a sterile vial during the initial assessment. The binding agent glowed. That was the only word for it. It did not glow brightly. It was not dramatic. But there was a faint luminescence to the compound for exactly 4 seconds, a silvery warmth that she could feel against her palms through the glass of the vial, and then it settled into a dark, viscous solution that looked almost like ink. She administered it in 3 stages over the course of 10 minutes, partially through the wounds directly, partially as a slow injection into the bloodstream. The 3rd stage required her to place her palm flat against the primary wound on his side, and hold it there, skin to wound, while the compound finished its work, which was the intimate part of the blood compact, and the part that would create the marker that his court would be able to detect. Her hand on his bare skin felt like pressing her palm against a live wire. Not painful, just charged, deeply, strangely alive in a way she did not entirely have words for. She kept her face neutral. This was medicine. She was doing medicine. His hand came up and covered hers, not pulling, not pressing, just resting there, his large cold fingers over her hand, holding the contact. His eyes were closed. "Thank you," he said very quietly. The wounds stopped bleeding 20 seconds later. The blood compound began to work. She could see it happening, the tissue around the injuries, warming back toward normal vampire temperature, the dark bruising beginning to recede, and the tightness around his jaw easing as the pain reduced. She withdrew her hand. He opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression she could not quite decode. "Tell me," she said, because she was going to need context if she was going to stay safe, and she was not naive enough to think helping the Vampire King in his moment of crisis had zero implications for her personal safety going forward. "Tell me what happened tonight." The story he told her took 20 minutes and was delivered in that same precise, controlled voice, though she noticed as his body recovered that he sat straighter and some of the marble-carved quality returned to his face, the regal posture reasserting itself almost automatically. There had been a betrayal in the Eastern Court. His name was Varek Solindri, one of Constantin's oldest council members, a vampire of 230 years, whose ambitions had apparently been quietly metastasizing for a decade while he smiled off across the council table. Varek had allied himself with a rival bloodline from the Western Territories, a court led by a vampire called Duchess Mirel Castanor, who had been working for 15 years to dismantle the Eastern Court's hold on the old blood territories that ran through the center of the city and contained, most critically, access to the sanctified blood wells that had kept this city's vampire population stable and law-abiding for the last 100 years. The sanctified wells were important to Noemi's world too, though many humans did not know they existed. The wells were the reason vampires in this city did not hunt freely, the reason the coexistence was possible at all, the reason her clinic existed. Varek had lured Constantin to a supposed emergency council session tonight, armed the room with 3 assassins carrying Valka-coated blades, and planned to present his death as the result of a rogue human attack, which would have inflamed vampire-human tensions to the point of unraveling the coexistence treaty entirely, which was exactly what Mirel Castanor needed to justify moving her Western forces into the city under the guise of restoring order. Constantin had survived the ambush. 3 of the 4 assassins had not. The 4th had escaped. He had killed Varek in the council chamber, and then, bleeding and suppressed, with every member of his court potentially compromised and nobody he could trust, he had come to the one address he had carried in the back of his knowledge for 2 years. Hers. "Why did you know my address?" Noemi asked. He did not look even slightly abashed. "Because I made it my business to know the most capable healer in this city," he said. "And because I had you investigated thoroughly 2 years ago when I became aware that you were treating members of my court. You investigated me. Extensively." A pause. "You have no criminal record, your finances are uncomplicated, you have 3 citations for medical excellence from the Human Licensing Board and 2 from the Vampire Healing Council. You have never disclosed confidential patient information in 12 years of practice, and you were described by my physician Aldrich as the only human healer whose knowledge of vampire biology he would trust with a council member's life." Another pause, slightly smaller than the first. He was correct, as it turns out. Noemi absorbed this. "You vetted me as a potential emergency resource 2 years ago and never introduced yourself." "I did not expect to require emergency resources," Constantin said, with the faint, precise irony of a man who was acknowledging that the universe had corrected his confidence. Despite everything, she almost smiled. She did not, because there were more pressing concerns. "Your 4th assassin escaped," she said. "If Varek had allies among your court beyond the council chamber, they will be looking for you. And if they trace you here," she let the implication finish itself. "They will not find me quickly," he seized. "I was careful," he paused. "But you are correct that remaining here creates risk for you. I will leave before dawn." "You will leave before dawn nothing," she said briskly, getting to her feet and crossing to the supply cabinet. "The Valka compound is neutralized, but your regenerative system has been under profound stress. If you go out there tonight and encounter any kind of physical conflict before your system has had 12 hours of recovery, you will not survive it regardless of your normal capabilities." "That is not an opinion, that is physiology." Silence. She turned around to find him watching her with that expression again, the one she could not decode, and realized it might be that nobody had spoken to him that flatly in quite some time. 12 hours, he said. Minimum. He looked at his hands. She noticed he had very still hands, the kind that had learned stillness over centuries, hands that knew their own strength and kept it quiet. My court is in chaos, he said. My council is compromised. Castanor's people are moving tonight, I know, she said. Who can you trust? He was quiet for a long moment. My captain, Miroslav Thane. He was not at the council session tonight because I sent him to the outer territories 2 days ago on what I was told was a border dispute. Varek arranged his absence, but Miroslav is loyal to a depth I would stake my existence on. Can you reach him without going through court channels that Castanor's people might be monitoring? A fractional pause. You are thinking tactically. I am thinking about keeping you alive long enough to fix the mess that was made tonight, she said. Which is in my interest because if the Eastern Court falls apart, the coexistence treaty falls apart, and then my clinic becomes a war zone. So yes, I am thinking tactically. Can you reach Miroslav? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, which she noticed was extraordinarily expensive and also extremely ruined, and produced a mobile phone that looked like it had been custom-made, the case bearing the Eastern Court's sigil in relief. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at her. The court network will be monitored. Any signal from this device will be traced within 3 minutes. Then use mine, she said, and held out her own phone. He took it from her fingers carefully, as though aware he could crush it if he was not precise, and she watched him dial a number from memory. The call connected in 2 rings. Miroslav, he said. The council chamber. Varek. Come to the address I am sending you now, and come dark, come fast, come alone. He ended the call, sent the address from her phone with practiced ease, and handed it back. He will be here in 40 minutes, Constantin said. Good, she said. Lie back. He raised one pale eyebrow with tremendous dignity. Your body is recovering, she said, and the healing process is metabolically expensive. You need to be horizontal. Lying back on an examination table is not a defeat. It is physiology. I promise the table will not defeat you. The very slight quirk of his mouth suggested he might be genuinely amused. He lay back, not with the careful movements of a wounded man, but with the precise, controlled motion of someone who never did anything without full intentionality, and she pulled a clean blanket up and placed it over him with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she applied to every patient. You treat kings the same as you treat everyone else, he said, watching the ceiling. I treat patients the same as I treat everyone else, she corrected, pulling up her stool and beginning to chart his vitals. You happen to be a king. That's your problem, not mine. It is currently a rather significant problem, yes, he agreed, and there it was again, that dry, precise irony, and she found herself thinking that he was not what she had expected, and she had not particularly expected anything. She took his blood pressure, which worked differently in vampires, but had measurable analogues, checked his pupils, tested the wound sites, and wrote everything down in the cramped shorthand she had developed over years, because it was faster than typing and could not be searched by anyone who did not know her system. How long have you been doing this work? He asked. The question surprised her slightly, because she had been thinking of him as a patient, and patients usually did not make conversational inquiries while she was running assessments. 12 years, she said. You were young when you started. 19, she said. My grandmother was a healer before me. She worked with the first generation of vampires who came above ground after the Revelation. The Revelation was what they called the year, 23 years ago, when vampires had collectively, carefully, and strategically made their existence known to human governments and begun the long, complicated negotiation of coexistence. She taught me most of what I know about vampire biology. The rest, I taught myself. A healer's lineage, he said, and something in his voice was thoughtful. More of a calling than a lineage, she said. My grandmother had the gift for it. I seem to have inherited the obsession. Why the borderlands? He asked. Why this district, this clinic, this place between 2 worlds? You could have a clean human practice in a safe neighborhood. She set down her pen and looked at him. Because this is where people need help. Because the district between human and vampire territories is where the most vulnerable people end up, the ones who fall through the cracks of both systems. Because the coexistence only works if someone is actually committed to maintaining the health of both communities, and that requires someone who is not afraid of either side. She paused. And because I find the work interesting. Vampire physiology is extraordinary. I would be bored out of my mind treating only human patients. He turned his head to look at her, and the silver eyes had sharpened considerably, the recovery process clearly accelerating as they spoke. "You are extraordinary," he said simply, and the word landed without the weight of flattery, more like an observation. A precise one. She felt warmth climb her throat and did not allow it to reach her face. "Rest," she said. He closed his eyes. She was still sitting there, updating her charts and listening to the quiet sounds of his recovery, when a knock came at the reinforced back door, precisely 38 minutes later. She checked through the security camera she had installed 3 years ago after an incident she did not like to revisit, and saw a tall, dark-haired vampire in traveling clothes, moving with the coiled, dangerous readiness of a soldier who had been running at full speed and was not showing it, because showing effort was evidently not something people in Constantin's world did. She opened the door. Miroslav Thane looked at her for exactly 1 second with eyes the color of dark amber. "You are the healer," he said. "I am," she said. "He is stable. Come in." The reunion between Constantin and his captain was brief in words and absolutely voluminous in the quality of the silence between them. Miroslav crossed the room, assessed his king with a single sweeping look, and then went very still with something that, on a more expressive face, might have been visible relief. "My lord," he said. "Varek is dead," Constantin said. "The council is compromised. Castanor is moving. What do you know?" "I received word an hour ago that Castanor's advance guard crossed the district border. They are moving toward the wells." Miroslav's voice was clipped, efficient. "If they reach the wells before we do, they can begin the process of severing the sanctification. It will take them 48 hours, but once it starts, the blood law governing the coexistence treaty becomes unenforceable." Noemi stood up. Both of them looked at her. "The sanctification of the wells is not only a vampire court process," she said. "It was co-signed by the Human Health Council under the Treaty of Binding Hands. If Castanor's people attempt to sever it, that constitutes a direct act of aggression against a jointly governed civic resource. The Human Council has the authority to activate the city's ward system, which would lock the district boundaries and prevent movement in or out of the well territories." She paused. "I am a medical liaison on the Joint Health Council. I have the authority to make that call." The silence in the room was absolute. Constantin sat up. The motion was smooth and sure, and she noted with professional satisfaction that the Valkyr effects were continuing to reverse. He looked at her with an expression that she thought she might be starting to decode. If you activate the ward system as a Human Council liaison," he said, "you are publicly entering this conflict. Anyone who wants to trace tonight's events will find a thread leading directly to you." "I am aware," she said. "It will mark you as an ally of the Eastern Court. Castanor does not treat her enemies gently." "Noted," she said. "Is what I described accurate? Can the ward activation lock the well territories?" Miroslav answered, because he was clearly the operational expert. "Yes, and it would hold for 72 hours under the treaty, which would give us time to consolidate, expose Varek's conspiracy to the full Joint Council, and neutralize Castanor's legal position before she can regroup. Then I am making the call," Noemi said and picked up her phone. "Noemi." Her name in his voice, she stopped. Constantin had risen from the examination table, and he was standing now, fully upright, all 6 feet and 3 inches of him. The blanket she had placed over him still creased down one side of his jacket, which was an incongruously human detail on a very inhuman figure. His expression was as controlled as ever, but there was something beneath it, something urgent and uncharacteristically direct. "You understand what you are choosing," he said, and it was not quite a question. "I understand," she said. "This is not your war. The sanctified wells provide stability for both communities," she said. "The coexistence treaty is the reason my clinic exists, and the reason 1,000 people in this district are safe tonight, instead of caught in a blood territory war. If that is not worth protecting, I do not know what is." She held his gaze. "I am making the call, Constantin." His first name, she had not meant to use it. It came out of her mouth before she had decided to say it, and she felt it register in the air between them, the small significant shift in formality. The tiny step across a line neither of them had acknowledged was there. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds.
"Make the call,"
he said quietly. She made the call. The Human Council liaison desk operated around the clock because the coexistence treaty required it. She spoke to the duty officer for 4 minutes, invoking her medical liaison authority under Section 9 of the Treaty of Binding Hands, providing the specific threat assessment and requesting immediate activation of the district ward system around the Well territories. The duty officer escalated to the overnight council director in under 90 seconds. The council director authorized the activation in another 2 minutes. The wards locked at 12:57 in the morning. Noemi ended the call and sat down, because the weight of what she had just done had arrived, and she was going to acknowledge it for exactly 30 seconds before moving forward. Constantin was watching her. "How are your wounds?" she asked. 90% recovered, he said. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first," she said. "By keeping the Eastern Court stable for the last 400 years in a way that made this district livable." She looked up at him. "So we are approximately even." Something crossed his face then that she had not seen there before. Something that was warmer and more unguarded than anything he had shown in the hour and a half since he had collapsed on her doorstep, and it was gone in a moment, returned behind the marble composure, but she had seen it, Miroslav. She noticed with peripheral awareness, was very carefully looking at the wall. The next hours were operational. Miroslav coordinated with a small number of thoroughly trusted court members, reaching them through back channels that bypassed the compromised court network. Constantin sat at Noemi's small desk in the corner and worked through the legal and political dimensions of the night's events, drafting the formal accusation documents that would need to go before the Joint Council once the ward period allowed for meetings. He worked with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who had navigated political crises many times and knew exactly what needed to happen in what order. Noemi made coffee because she needed it and offered because it was her clinic, and Constantin accepted a cup with genuine courtesy and then actually drank it, which she had not expected. "You can metabolize coffee?" she asked. "Imperfectly," he said, with that dry half-tone of amusement. "It does nothing useful for me physiologically. But it is not unpleasant, and the ritual of it is grounding." "We have coffee in the court, 400 years of coffee," she said. "It was not invented until roughly a quarter of the way into that span," he said. "But yes, approximately 300 years of coffee, with a gap during the Ottoman political complications." She laughed. She had not meant to. It was not a loud laugh, just a short, genuine one that escaped before she could moderate it, and she saw him look at her with what she was increasingly certain was warmth. Around 4 in the morning, with the ward system holding and Miroslav's network quietly re-securing the court positions, Constantin rose from her desk and came to stand by the window that looked out at the empty pre-dawn street, hands clasped behind his back. Noemi came to stand beside him, not close, a professional foot of distance, just looking out at the same street. "The compact marker," he said after a moment, "the one that will register to my court." "Yes," she said. "When this is resolved, I will formally register the healing compact with the court records. It will protect you legally. Anyone who attempts to use the compact as leverage against you will be invoking a document that explicitly grants you the status of protected court ally." She turned her head to look at his profile. "You are thinking about how to protect me from the political fallout." "I have been thinking about how to protect you from the political fallout since you made the call to activate the wards," he said. "You walked into my world tonight, Noemi, deliberately. With full knowledge of the consequences, I will not leave you unguarded in that world." The sound of her name in his voice had done the same thing it did the first time, made the air feel different, and she was not going to pretend that was nothing. "I can protect myself," she said. "I know," he said. "You have demonstrated that rather comprehensively. That is not the point." He turned from the window and looked at her, and the silver eyes in the pre-dawn half-light were extraordinary, lit with that inner luminescence, and he was very close, she realized, closer than the professional foot of distance she had intended to maintain. "The point is that I want to protect you." Those are different things. One is about your capability. The other is about my intention. The silence between them was charged in a way that had nothing to do with vampire politics or blood compounds. Constantin, she said quietly. I know, he said. This is not the moment, a pause. But I want you to understand that there will be a moment, and I intend to request it properly. She held his gaze. Request it properly, she repeated. I am 400 years old and a king, he said, with quiet dignity. I do not stumble into things. When I choose something, I choose it deliberately and completely. The silver eyes did not waver. You have my word that I am not speaking carelessly. Noemi Graves, who had been the steadiest person in every crisis she had ever walked into, felt something in her chest that was warm and slightly terrifying and entirely new. I look forward to the moment, she said. Dawn arrived, pale and thin, and Constantin withdrew from the window before the first direct light crossed the sill, the old instinct impeccable even after 400 years. The clinic's basement level had no windows on two sides, and he settled into the back office without being directed, which told her he had already assessed the building's light exposure automatically. Of course he had. Miroslav departed just after 5 to coordinate the final repositioning of the court's loyal forces. Leaving them alone, Noemi made more coffee. She was running on 6 hours of accumulated sleep deficit, and the particular crystalline alertness of someone who had been through something large and was still processing it. She sat down at her work table and found that the valerian root she had been grinding when Constantin's body hit her door was still there in the mortar, slightly overground now from the force of the night's interruption. She picked up the pestle and finished the task. Old habit. Finish what you started. My grandmother would have been amused by tonight, she said, not because she planned to say it, just because it was true, and she was tired enough that the filter between thought and speech had thinned. He was in the doorway of the back office, leaning with casual elegance against the frame. Jacket folded over his arm because the earlier triage had done nothing good to it. His white shirt rolled at the sleeves in a way that was somehow incongruously human, and showed that his wounds had fully healed, the skin unmarked and smooth, the body's regenerative system restored to its full capability. Tell me about her, he said, so she did. She talked about Irina Graves, her grandmother, a compact and formidable Hungarian immigrant who had arrived in this country the year before the revelation with a suitcase of herbal manuals and medical textbooks, and a healer's gift so strong it was practically a physical presence. Who had been one of the first human healers to establish contact with vampire communities in the post-revelation years, not out of ambition but out of the same stubbornness that ran in Noemi's own veins. Who had looked at an injured vampire who appeared at her door 30 years ago, a young court member who had been in a traffic accident of all mundane things, and had simply treated him, and from that one act of unfiltered professional compassion had built the first unofficial bridge between her family and the vampire courts that Noemi had eventually inherited. There is a tradition in your family, Constantin said, when she finished, of opening doors to what arrives at them. Seems like a pattern, yes, she agreed. It is remarkable, he said, and he meant it completely, she could hear that. Most humans who are not afraid of us are either reckless or self-serving. You are neither. You are simply, he paused, choosing the word with the precision he applied to everything, sovereign in yourself. Noemi set down the pestle. That might be the best thing anyone has ever said to me. The smile that crossed his face then was full, not the fractional, ironic, almost smile she had seen earlier, but a real one, brief and genuine and extraordinary on that marble-carved face. And she thought that 400 years of history were probably not crowded with people who had made him smile like that. He crossed the room and sat down across the work table from her. They talked until noon. About her practice, about the court, about the city, and how both of them had watched the coexistence treaty either hold or fray, depending on who was running which institution in any given year. He told her about the early decades after the revelation, with a clarity and personal detail that no history book had, and she listened with the complete focused attention of someone who understood that she was hearing something irreplaceable, the lived experience of a person who had been there. He asked her questions too about her medical methods, about the specific compounds she had developed herself, about the herbal lineage that underpinned her practice, and he asked with the genuine curiosity of someone whose intellectual hunger was undiminished by 4 centuries. At noon, Miroslav contacted them to confirm that Castanor's advance guard had been contained within the locked ward territory, and that the Joint Council's emergency session had been convened under the treaty provisions. Constantin needed to attend. He needed to be visible, present, and authoritative, the king restored, and in command, the betrayal of Varek fully documented, and the conspiracy against the coexistence treaty laid before both human and vampire council members simultaneously. He stood, and the transition was seamless. The jacket went back on. The composure was fully assembled. The king was present, regal and unassailable, not a hair out of place. He paused at her door. "Will you be safe?" he asked. "The compact marker will tell anyone who looks that I am under your court's protection," she said. "And I have a reinforced door and 3 years of self-defense training with your court physician's nephew, so yes." "Aldrich's nephew taught you to fight," he said, and the tone suggested he was filing this information away with appreciation. "He said you would want someone to," she said. "He was not wrong," Constantin said. "I will return tonight." "If you are willing, I will be here," she said. He looked at her for one moment more, and the silver eyes carried everything they had said between them and a few things they had not. "Then I will return tonight," he said, and left. The council session lasted 7 hours. Noemi heard about it, in fragments through the afternoon, through Miroslav's brief messages relayed through her phone, through the official joint council feed she had access to as a medical liaison, and through the particular quality of the silence in the district, which shifted from tense to something else, something that felt like held breath releasing. Constantin presented the full documentation of Varek's conspiracy. He presented the ward activation request, including the name of the human liaison who had initiated it, which entered Noemi's name formally and permanently into the council record as an acting ally under the treaty's protection clauses. He presented the communication intercepts his captain had pulled from Castanor's advance guard, which documented the Western Duchess's direct involvement in the assassination attempt on the king of a sovereign bloodline, which, under blood law, was an act of war. Mireille Castanor's response was to deny everything, which nobody who had reviewed the intercepts found convincing. By 8 in the evening, the Joint Council had issued a formal censure of the Western Court, activated the full treaty protection for the sanctified wells, and established a temporary oversight body to govern the Eastern Court's council seats, while the internal investigation into Varek's network of collaborators was completed. Castanor was ordered back to the Western Territories with an escort and a deadline to answer the formal charges. The coexistence treaty held. The district's night began as it always did, people moving on the streets, human and vampire, and the complicated space between, the cafes opening and the clinics running, and the city continuing the enormous, imperfect, daily work of existing together. At 9:45, the knock came at Noemi's front door. She opened it. Constantin stood on her threshold, and he was different now. Not different in the obvious ways. Not the emergency bloodied state of last night. He was immaculate, dressed in dark grey, his white hair perfect, his bearing fully regal, but his face was different. The composure was still there, but it was not used as armor. He was not guarded. He looked like a man who had decided something. "You said you would return," she said. "I said I would return," he agreed. "And I said I would request the moment properly." She stepped back from the door. "Come in. Come in." He came in, and the clinic that was her world looked different with him in it, not smaller, not diminished, just more honest somehow. Both of them in the space that had hosted last night's crisis, without the emergency to structure the interaction, and she thought that this was the test of something real, whether it existed, when the adrenaline was not there to carry it. It did. He crossed to the work table and laid something on it. A document, formal, with the Eastern Court seal, written in the old script. "The court registration of the healing compact," he said. "Your protection is now formal and permanent under blood law. No member of my court or any ally court may approach you in aggression without invoking a violation of ancient vow." He paused. "And I have additionally registered you as a protected person under the King's personal seal, which goes beyond the healing compact and requires my individual authorization. That document is effectively my word, placed into permanent legal record. that you are under my protection for as long as I exist. She looked at the document, then at him. That is a considerable commitment, she said. Yes, he said, it is, Constantin. She chose his name deliberately, watching the way it registered in the set of his face. Last night you said that when you choose something, you choose it deliberately and completely. I did say that, he said. Is this you choosing deliberately and completely? The silver eyes held hers and did not waver. I am 400 years old, he said, and I have not felt this certain about anything in the last century. A pause. You are extraordinary and brave, and you know blood law, and you grind valerian root at midnight, and you make the impossible choice without flinching, and you made me smile at something in the worst night of recent memory, and I have been in this city for a long time, Noemi, in this world, and I would very much like to be in it with you. She crossed the distance between them, not rushing, not hesitating, deliberate, the way she did everything. She placed her palm against his chest, feeling the stillness of it, the contained power of him, the cold precision of a heart that beat differently than hers, and had beat for 400 years, and was beating now with a steadiness that felt to her hand like an anchor. He raised his hand and covered hers. The same gesture as last night on the examination table, but different now, nothing clinical in it. The moment, she said quietly. The moment, he confirmed, and bent his head and kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was precise and careful and reverent, and it was the most thoroughly intentional thing she had ever experienced, the sense of someone choosing with their entire self, and she met it with the same full intention, her healer's hands and her healer's heart, and the full weight of the choice she had made the moment she opened her door last night and grabbed him under the arms. They stood there for a long time. The world outside continued. The district breathed. The city did its complicated work. When they finally separated, he kept his forehead bent to hers, and she felt him exhale, a long, slow release of something he had probably been carrying in his chest for longer than one night. I want to know you, he said quietly, properly, at a pace that is real. I am not a man who confuses gratitude for feeling or crisis for connection. What I feel is separate from both of those things. I know, she said. I feel the same. Good, he said, and lifted his head. The weeks that followed were extraordinary in the way that ordinary things become extraordinary when you are paying full attention to them. Constantin came to her clinic, not as a patient, not as a court matter, simply because he said he would, and he kept his word with the absolute consistency of someone who did not know how to be otherwise. He came in the evenings when the clinic was closed and the district was quiet, and they sat at her work table or on the clinic's back steps with coffee, and they talked. She learned him the way she learned everything, thoroughly and specifically and with pleasure. She learned that he read with the obsessive comprehensiveness of someone who had 4 centuries of accumulated intellectual appetite, that his library was larger than some university collections, and organized in a taxonomy he had developed himself over decades. She learned that he was genuinely funny, in a way that was easy to miss because the humor was dry and precise and nested inside observations that seemed on the surface entirely serious. She learned that he had a deep, sustaining love for the court and its people, not abstract, monarchical dedication, but the specific attachment of someone who had watched individuals grow and age and struggle, and had been invested in each of them as people. He learned her. She could feel it happening, the way his attention worked like a scientific instrument, precise and thorough and generous. He learned the way she moved when she was in full professional focus, the particular stillness of her hands when she was concentrating, the way she used humor to diffuse tension in difficult conversations and seriousness, to honor things that mattered. He asked about her work, her patience, her methods, and listened with a quality of attention she had not often experienced, the sense of being genuinely heard. Miroslav, whom she encountered regularly now, as Constantin's security consideration required his captain to be at least peripherally present, was a compact, formidable presence, who communicated in approximately 30% as many words as necessary, but who she noticed had quietly rearranged whatever security variables he managed to include her building in his daily assessments. He did not acknowledge this when she thanked him. He just nodded once and changed the subject. She had the strong impression that Miroslav Thane had decided she was acceptable and was expressing this in the only language he reliably used, which was action. The investigation into Varek's network uncovered 2 additional collaborators within the Eastern Court. Both were brought before the court tribunal, their cases presented under blood law with the full documentation that Constantin's methodical preparation dissembled, and the verdicts were swift and unambiguous. The court was not clean again. Courts were never entirely clean. But it was stable, and the remaining council members, who had not been part of the conspiracy, redoubled their loyalty in the aftermath, as people often did when they had been reminded of what disloyalty produced. Mireille Castanor presented her case before the Joint Council's formal tribunal 3 weeks after the events of that night. Constantin attended. Noemi attended as the medical liaison, whose ward activation had been a central piece of the documented response. They sat at different tables within the council chamber, as befitted their different institutional roles. But she was aware of him across the room with a constancy that she had stopped pretending was professional. Castanor was a striking figure, tall and centuries old herself, with dark eyes that moved across the room with a calculating precision that Noemi recognized as the kind of intelligence that had caused enormous damage because it was in service of pure self-interest. She looked at Constantin with something that was not quite hatred and not quite respect, some complicated thing between them that spoke to centuries of political antagonism. She looked at Noemi once, a brief, evaluating look, and then looked away. The tribunal found Castanor in violation of 4 separate blood law provisions, including the ancient vow prohibiting assassination attempts between sovereign bloodlines. She was stripped of her Western Territory access rights for a period of 50 years and required to cede governance of the Western Wells to the Joint Council oversight body. It was not destruction, it was not exile, but it was a profound diminishment of everything she had spent 15 years maneuvering to achieve, and the look on her face when the finding was read made Noemi think that Mireille Castanor would spend the next 50 years in a fury, and then the 50 after that in a cold, controlled preparation for her next move. That was the nature of centuries, she supposed. After the tribunal, in the wide corridor outside the council chamber, Constantin found her as the other council members, dispersed into conversations and documentation. He stood beside her with the authority of someone who did not feel any need to explain his presence or moderate his expression. "It is done," he said. "For now," she said, because she was not naive. "For now," he agreed. "In my experience, these things cycle. Castanor will not forgive, but she will be constrained for 50 years, and in 50 years a great deal can be established." He looked at her. "The treaty can be made stronger. The coexistence infrastructure can be built deeper and more comprehensively, so that any future attempt to disrupt it faces a structure that is too embedded to dismantle from outside." Died. "Is that what you are planning?" she asked. "It is what I have been planning since the night I realized how close the treaty came to being destroyed by one man's ambition," he said, "and I would very much like to plan it with someone who understands both sides of it." He paused. "Officially, I would like to propose a formal joint advisory position, a liaison role between the Eastern Court and the Human, Medical and Civic Councils, with full standing and independence. Something structured so that the person holding it has real authority, real access, or full legal protection." His eyes held hers, and informally, "I would like to propose that the person I am hoping will consider the role is also the person I want to have dinner with tonight. Somewhere that has nothing to do with council chambers or treaties, somewhere with good wine and no blood politics." Noemi looked at him for 3 full seconds. "Dinner," she said. "Dinner," he confirmed. "You are asking me to dinner with full formal court liaison position attached." "They are separate proposals," he said with measured dignity. "The position stands regardless of your answer to the dinner. I would not make professional opportunity contingent on personal answer. They happen to be offered simultaneously because I am trying to be efficient." 400 years old and still multitasking, she said. "I find it serves," he said. She smiled, full and unguarded. "Yes to dinner," she said, "and yes to the advisory position. I want to read the full proposal document first before formal acceptance because I have standards, but yes, in principle." "I would expect nothing less," he said, and the warmth in his voice was something she was learning to look for. to find in the precise way he said her name, and in the quality of attention he gave her, and in the small, deliberate gestures of someone who expressed feeling through action because he had had centuries to refine how he said important things. Dinner was in a restaurant she had not known existed, in the upper levels of a building that looked from the outside like a corporate tower, and was, from the inside, a space of extraordinary dim beauty. Dark wood and candlelight and ceilings high enough to feel like a cathedral, the kind of place that existed for the old and wealthy and unhurried. They sat across from each other, and the conversation moved, without effort, from the immediately practical to the genuinely personal to the absurd and back. And somewhere between the first course and the second, she became aware that she was happy. Not the satisfaction-adjacent feeling of a successful clinical outcome, or the relief-adjacent feeling of a crisis resolved, but simply and specifically happy, in the company of this specific person who looked at her like she was the most interesting thing in any room. He was not performing interest. That was the thing about him she had understood early, and now understood more completely. Everything he did was genuine. The attention, the warmth, the humor, the protectiveness. He was not a man who said things he did not mean or did things without full intention. 4 centuries had apparently stripped him of any interest in performance. He simply was what he was, fully and without apology. She found this profoundly, specifically, unexpectedly attractive. Walking back through the district afterward, the city doing its late-night work around them, he kept pace beside her with the ease of someone who had matched his stride to another person's, and was entirely comfortable there. His hand found hers, not taking, not gripping. Just an open hand offered alongside hers, and she took it. And they walked like that through the cool city night, with the lights reflecting off wet pavement and the distant sound of music from somewhere, and the particular quality of quiet that belonged to a city that had found, however imperfectly, a way to live with all its different kinds of darkness. At her clinic door, she unlocked it and turned back to find him very close, his expression open in a way she had not seen in the council chamber or the court. The composed authority set aside, just the person underneath. "I meant what I said," he told her, "about choosing deliberately, about wanting to be in this world with you." "I know you did," she said. "This is not a small thing for me," he said. "In 400 years, I have learned to be careful with what I allow myself to want. Not because I am afraid of wanting, but because when I want something, I want it completely. And I want you to understand that before this goes any further." He paused. "I do not want you to feel that you are navigating something whose depth you did not know." She reached up and put her hand against his jaw, warm cold under her palm, the marble-carved face and the silver eyes close, and she felt him go very still in the way he went still when something mattered. "I am a healer," she said. "I am trained to assess what I am working with before I proceed. I have been assessing you since you collapsed on my doorstep, and what I find is someone who is honest and careful and deeply committed to the things he believes in, and who makes me feel like the world is larger and more interesting than I knew." She held his gaze. "I am not navigating something I do not understand. I understand it very well, and I am choosing it." He turned his head slightly, pressed his lips to her palm. "Then I am the luckiest king in 4 centuries, he said against her skin. She laughed. Again, that genuine, unplanned laugh, and he straightened and looked at her with that rare, full smile, and the night around them was cold and full of city sounds, and it was exactly right. 3 months moved through with the particular rich quality of time that is fully inhabited. The joint advisory position was formalized, the documentation exactly as thorough as she had required, her authority and independence written into it, with the precision of someone who understood that a protected position needed to be structurally sound, not just verbally guaranteed. She attended court sessions as a liaison with the calm, direct manner she brought to everything, unintimidated by the ancient vampire politics was swirling in rooms. And her colleagues on the Human Council were variously fascinated and alarmed by the new visibility she had developed. She did not find this difficult to navigate. She had always existed in the space between worlds. She was good at it. Constantin's court stabilized. The new council appointments were carefully made, the internal investigation completed. The collaborators of Varek's network either prosecuted or identified and watched. Miroslav managed the security with his characteristic, efficient silence and occasional single-sentence summaries that were, she had learned, extremely reliable indicators of actual state of affairs. She expanded the clinic. With the formal advisory position came resources she had not previously had access to, and she built out the space. Added a proper vampire-specific treatment bay with the environmental controls that mattered for their physiology, hired 2 additional staff, a human nurse and a young vampire medic who had been trained under Aldrich, and came with a recommendation from both the court physician and, she suspected, Constantin himself, though he did not mention having arranged it. She mentioned this suspicion to him one evening. He did not deny it. "You needed staff," he said. "Tobias needed placement. These facts seemed related. You could have mentioned it." "I could have. Then you might have declined on principle and been understaffed for another 6 months." A pause. "This way you met him, assessed him yourself, and made your own determination." She had in fact found Tobias to be excellent. She was aware of this. "That is an extremely diplomatic framing of arranging things behind my back," she said. "I prefer to think of it as strategic timing," he said. And the silver eyes carried the particular quality they had when he was being precisely, deliberately amused. "You are insufferable," she said. "You knew this when you chose me," he said. "I did," she agreed. "I chose you anyway." The autumn came, and the district changed color, and one evening Constantin arrived at the clinic as she was closing with 2 things. The first was a key, old-fashioned and heavy, the kind cast in silver-steel alloy that opened nothing in the modern world in quite the same way as it opened things in the vampire one. He set it on her work table. "A key to the court residence," he said. "Not a demand, not an expectation. A door that is open if you want it, whenever you want it, on your terms." She picked it up. It was warm from his pocket. She turned it in her fingers. "And the second thing?" she asked. He reached into his other pocket and placed a second item beside the first. It was small, a ring, obviously old, with a dark stone she did not recognize set in a silver setting worked in the old-world style, intricate and precise and extraordinary. "The compact ring of the Eastern Court," he said, and his voice was steady, and his face was completely open in a way that she had learned was the most significant thing about him. That openness, because it was given rarely and meant completely. Traditionally offered by the king to the person he intends to spend his existence beside. Not a transaction, not a legal mechanism, not a political tool. A personal declaration. The expression, in the oldest tradition I know, of a choice made deliberately and completely. Noemi Graves, who had not cried in her clinic since her first year, when a patient she could not save had reminded her of her grandmother, felt something move through her chest that was large and warm and absolute. She looked at the ring, then at him. 400 years, she said quietly. 400 years, he confirmed. And then the night you opened your door, and everything after it. Which has been better than the 400 years preceding. Constantin. His name in her mouth, and everything she meant by it. Noemi. Hers in his, and the same. She picked up the ring, she put it on. He reached out and covered her hand with both of his, those large, still, careful hands, and she felt his exhale again, that long, slow release, the same thing she had felt on the night they first kissed, the sense of someone setting down something heavy that they had been carrying for a very long time. I did not know, he said very quietly, what this would feel like, being chosen by someone who knew exactly what they were choosing. She stepped forward into him, and his arms came around her, with the contained, careful strength she had felt every time he touched her, the awareness of his own power held in service of her comfort, and she put her forehead against his chest and listened to the heartbeat that was not quite like hers, and had been keeping time for 4 centuries. You are going to have to learn to communicate about Tobias-level interventions going forward, she said into his shirt. She felt the rumble of his laugh, low and real, the best sound she knew. I make no promises, he said. Insufferable, she said. Yours, he said, and his arms tightened gently. And the clinic around them was warm with lamplight and herbs, and the smell of antiseptic and old paper and coffee. Her world, which was also now his world. This between 2 worlds where the coexistence was real, and the door was always open, and the impossible choice she had made in the first second of the first night had led, through crisis and danger and dark politics and trust, built carefully and love grown fully. To exactly here outside, the city continued. The district breathed its complicated, imperfect breath. The sanctified wells ran clear beneath the streets. The wards held. The treaty held. The healer and the king stood in the lamplight of a basement clinic that smelled of valerian root and coffee, his arms around her and her ring on her finger, and the whole long future of them. Extraordinary and unhurried, opening out ahead like the first light on the first morning of something entirely new. The door was closed, the night was safe, and they were exactly where they had chosen to be, which was, after everything, the only thing that had ever really mattered.